Welcome to our threewells.co podcast. I have an extra special guest here today, and I can't wait to dive in with him. And don't forget, this will be posted on threewells.co, on YouTube, and of course on our social platforms, channels, whatever you want to call them now. It will be out there for everyone to enjoy in perpetuity. And I am so happy to be introducing our special guest, Mr. Todd Bailey from Leonine Ventures. And we're going to get into all about what that is and what Todd does. Todd's got a pretty amazing background in public affairs and government affairs and public relations, etc. And I am not going to steal your thunder because I won't do you justice in describing your fantastic background, Todd. So why don't you give us all a quick overview of you and Leonine, and just give us some context.
Yeah, no, thanks, Jason. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, and thanks to Three Wells for doing this. So I've been in public affairs, government affairs for almost 20 years now. Time flies, but started actually as an executive director in a small nonprofit, League of Conservation Voters in Vermont. It's kind of how I got into the political game in the state of Vermont, and doing mostly electoral work on the environmental side, actually. And it was wonderful, and got to know a lot of people, met everybody in the legislature, whether they were elected official, professional in government affairs, doing public relations. It really allowed me to kind of broaden my view of everything that was happening in Montpelier. And from that, you make those relationships and you get to know people. And that led to me joining Leonine, which was then KSE Partners, one of the largest lobbying firms in the state of Vermont. And just kind of switching gears from doing electoral work on the campaign side to doing advocacy lobbying on a contract basis, which meant we work for anyone and everyone with limitations. You know, one of the nice things about owning your own business is you can say, I want to do this work, or I don't want to do this work. And we certainly had that flexibility, and we used it. But it was great. You know, our firm went into an existence in 1987. So we've been around for over 30 years. And, you know, we've done a lot of different things and grown quite a bit over that time. Started out as just two people, Steve Kimball and Bob Sherman, who were the founders, to now roughly 40 people, including all of our part-time and seasonal folks, because legislative work is very seasonal, in most states anyway. A lot of people may know us actually nationally. We were the firm that passed civil unions, the first civil unions law in the country in Vermont in 2000. Eventually marriage equality in 2010, did all of that work for freedom to marry at the time, and really actually I think put us on the map as a firm, and from the work that we were doing. And I joined the firm in 2010 and was a lobbyist, eventually became the president of the government affairs team, lobbying for them on a variety of issues. And worked there for about 10 years until I switched over to doing Leonine Ventures, which is primarily focused on tech startup, cannabis, blockchain work, working nationally out of Philadelphia now. I left Vermont about 2 years ago, and I've really enjoyed kind of that switch from an everyday in the legislature to working, lobbying the executive branch, the legislature, doing public relations, running campaigns on issue advocacy, to really focus more on national government affairs, operations, and management.
Whew, that was a mouthful.
Go on, I haven't got it in to describe the firm yet. I'm just sick before I can do that.
And you know what? In all my excitement to introduce you, because I have been looking forward to this conversation, I didn't even introduce myself. So I probably should do that.
Yeah, please.
I'm so presumptuous. Hey, I'm Jason. Co-founder and CMO of Three Wells. I'll stop there because everybody can read my bio later, and we're more interested in talking to you. So you said a lot there. So we're going to talk about, in case you haven't picked up, those that are watching and or listening, we're going to talk about things like government affairs, public relations, the cannabis industry overall. So we're going to dive into all of that. But let's start at like the ground floor, Todd. Public affairs, government relations, government affairs, et cetera. What are they? And for someone in cannabis, why is it important to have someone like you on their side, or, advocating or working with you?
Yeah, it's a great question because the industry itself is, I think people understood what government affairs was maybe 15 or 20 years ago. They immediately thought it's just lobbying, or public relations is just lobbying. And it was a simple explanation. They kind of understood what that was, and someone would hire us and we'd go to the legislature or the executive branch and advocate for them on behalf of them for their particular issue, from anything from a small nonprofit to some of the largest companies in the world. And I think what we've seen in this industry is it's really evolved into something that is completely interconnected, and how all of these pieces really need to work together. And I'd add marketing into that as well, because I think everything has been become a big campaign, a big advertising campaign. And what changes is, who is your audience? Often with campaigns, your audience is the public. You're trying to sell them a good. For instance, with cannabis, you're trying to sell them your edibles. You're trying to sell them your flower. You want to market and brand yourself to those individuals. With public relations and public affairs and government affairs, it ties into that. But the audience is really the elected officials and the regulatory bodies within your state or your federal government that you need to deliver a message to that effectively conveys what it is that you're doing as an industry or as an individual business. And so what we do is, our primary work is focused on public relations and government affairs, and how those two pieces are really tied together. What we see often, especially with cannabis, is that the public is really unaware of what is happening in a regulatory sense and from a legal sense. Where is the legislature? Where is the governor? What have they decided to do or to not do? And what's allowed? And so if you're a business trying to operate within that regulatory system, how do you convey your message that resonates both with the public, so you're not harming your brand or interfering with your coexisting marketing campaign, while also simultaneously effectively communicating with regulators and legislators that have a lot of say over how your industry operates, which can clearly influence the success or failure of your overall business. Some of that might be in your control and not in your control based on the regulations in place. And so the services that we provide, they really range from everywhere from in-state to lobbying on behalf of someone, to nationally, where we're managing their entire operation for government affairs and public relations, to make sure that all of the pieces that they need to put together to make sure that they're staying within the regulatory boundaries, doing what is legal, and having a successful communications campaign, whether that be for commercial purposes or regulatory purposes, are strategic and flowing together, so that company is really expressing to the broader public and elected officials who they are, what they stand for, and what they're doing.
So what scale does that work at? And what I mean by that is, if you're a sole proprietor dispensary in, wherever, California, Colorado, or you're a national brand like a Papa, a Kiva, a Dixie, a Wana, someone like that.
Yeah.
Do you find that it's better for certain companies or certain sizes or certain types of companies in the cannabis space to engage you over others?
It's a great question. And I think it's a real dilemma for this industry in particular, because of how many craft cultivators or small businesses are really popping up in the cannabis industry, which is great. It's awesome, right? Let's have a more diverse marketplace and have more players, have different products. It's where creativity happens, we think. But those companies often don't necessarily believe or have the cash flow to hire someone like my firm or someone that's doing similar business in their particular state. And so I think it's all, if you looked at a graph, there's the X and Y axis are going to cross at some point, where there's a belief of what I can do, what I should do, and what's possible based on their own budget and the size of their company.
Yeah.
And so what we see is that a lot of the larger companies have this staff internally. They'll have a government affairs team that manages their regulatory and legislative practice, and a marketing firm probably on retainer. And so they're doing everything internally. These are the big companies. They have those budgets. And then there's the medium size and the small size. And often what happens and what we run into is that as these businesses are starting, especially in the tech sector, I would say, they have a lot of expertise. They have a lot of expertise on the team. That's how they're starting their business. But they very rarely have an expert in the government affairs, public relations side of things, because it's just not where people are popping up in the cannabis world for startups. And I think it benefits those companies the most. It's those mid-sized companies that stand to benefit the best from these types of services, because they're not breaking through the chatter. And that, I think that applies to both the commercial side and the regulatory side, where what we've seen, like in a state like Vermont, for instance, where they just passed legalization and the Cannabis Control Board has just been established. They're about to hire an executive director. So at that phase of, how do we even do this? What is it that we're supposed to be doing? And what's going to create a market that's both fair and profitable for the businesses and for the state? And if you're a small cultivator or a mid-sized cultivator and you're not communicating with them, they're not going to understand that. They're not going to know what the interest is from that particular group. And often, if they don't have someone that's familiar with government affairs or public relations, what they're hearing is only the commercial side. And a lot of people don't understand that commercial communication doesn't resonate with a regulatory body and a regulator who is more looking at it from a bureaucratic perspective. And so those companies need to figure out how to do that. Some people are lucky. They have those people on staff. They've been in government. They've done this work. But most don't. And I think that those are the people that are going to benefit the most. Those are the companies that are going to benefit the most by engaging a firm like mine and saying, help us do this. Help us communicate with the regulators as they're establishing the regulations, as the law is being written. We can lobby on your behalf to make sure that it's done right. We can develop a public relations strategy so that it's done right. And that way you're going to see success early versus trying to come into an industry where it's out ahead of you and you're not really sure how to handle it. And you're always in a reactive mode. And that's something I think everybody wants to avoid. And it's something that we help people avoid.
So I got a kind of an adjunct question, but you're a talented senior guy. You've done a lot in this space, in and outside of cannabis. And Leonine focuses, as I understand it, on cannabis and tech, or your tech startups. Those are your two big focal areas, yeah?
Yep.
With the insanity that we deal with in cannabis, and how hard this is, and the uncertainty of the legalities, and the sort of double taking that we have, government officials taking repeatedly on this subject for decades. Why would you go and do government affairs and public relations in cannabis?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's pretty simple. I've been really fortunate in my entire professional career. Every job that I ever took or activity that I took on in the firm was a challenge, and it was fun, and it made it something that I had to try to figure out and do as a new venture. And that's really where I got to with cannabis. And for better or worse, I'm a type of person that after a certain period of time, I get a little bored with what I'm doing, and I want to take on something new and be challenged. And the other thing is that I've been really lucky that everything that I've done has been a passion. Like when I was at the League of Conservation Voters and I was doing electoral work around environmental issues, it was a passion. I'm an environmentalist. I believe in it, and I think you can do really good things, but you have to engage in elections. And I love politics, so I engaged in elections. And then after doing that for a period of time, I was ready for the next thing, and I was lobbying in the legislature and figuring that out. I had never really lobbied before. And after going to the legislature every day for an extended period of time, it was like, okay, I'm okay with this. What's the next thing? And really, it was the right place at the right time to start this new line of business. The cannabis industry obviously is evolving quickly. It's growing immensely. So there's huge opportunity there. There's no doubt there's challenges, but I think they're all manageable and they're all fun. I believe from whether it's the social equity piece, the justice side of things, the historical injustice that's been done to the BIPOC communities around cannabis laws and regulations, to it becoming legal in a mature industry. All of these things are really important pillars of what's happening in our country from a policy perspective around cannabis. So not only was it stimulating for me from an industry perspective, but there were a lot of social challenges that could be taken on and try to work through and help some of these companies do a better job of also communicating what is it that they're doing to address some of those issues, to address some of the inequalities that exist in this industry.
Yeah, one of the things that's struck me, because you and I became fast friends. I mean, we only met a couple of years ago through a mutual friend, and um, one of the things that struck me was that you have this sort of bigger picture that we need to come together as an industry, cannabis that is, because we're designing the future, and every move we make collectively is critical. And right now, it seems like one of the real benefits that you play, not just individually for the company or whomever you're representing or working with, but as an industry as a whole, to help shape this in the right way. Because if we let this industry, in my opinion, we let this industry get away on us, and we're not, controlling the narrative and the story and the direction, then legacy ways of doing things like the alcohol and tobacco industry do right now, or even the misconceptions and misperceptions that are held by government officials right now as to what the plant really is and isn't. It's not highly addictive, it's not all the bad things that we saw in the 80s and 90s. It seems like you play a vital role on a bigger scale. Do you see it that way? I see you that way. Do you see yourself that way?
I try to think of myself that way. I do think of myself as someone that is always looking at the big picture. And then how do you work backwards to a starting point to actually achieve that big picture goal? And I think that when companies think similarly or clients think similarly, I think with our relationship, that's how it's going to work out best. If folks are really thinking, look, I just want to get to the next phase of my financial growth, and I don't care about all of the other things on the periphery that really matter as this industry comes into a mature status, then that's sure, I can do that. But I don't think it's going to work that well. And just be honest about that. And I'm honest about that with prospective clients, because I think there are so many things that matter right now. And I think so many things that they don't just matter for people truly on the ground that have been impacted. Entire communities have been impacted by our history around cannabis regulation and cannabis laws. So how do we do business that best starts to unwind some of that? It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take a lot of hard work.
So, hey, Todd, can I put words in your mouth and just say,
Yeah,
you're talking like the African American community, for example, and when you say communities that have been hit harder than others? Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, yeah, absolutely. I think that the Black community and Black communities in this country have disproportionately suffered under the effects of the war on drugs. And there's no question
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
And I think that, we can work on going in two different directions, and we can just say what we often say in this country, and that's it is what it is. It's a real problem, but it is what it is that, well, that's the past, let's move to the future and just kind of take things as they come. Or we can say, how can we both create a very successful industry, one that is going to be incredibly financially beneficial to everybody that's involved in it, but also be proactive and conscious of what has happened in the past and try to correct some of those errors and make it better for more players in this system. And some of that is, most people are very familiar with the term greenwashing. Companies come up with environmental policies to make them seem they're more environmental. So that's happening in this industry. We can't deny it, that it's happening in regard to social equity. We've seen a number of states pass social equity provisions that have been lacking, to say the least. They don't achieve the goals that people put out or present, and that's a good public relations campaign because it makes everybody believe we're doing the right thing from a social equity perspective. And I think the real challenge is, how do we figure out to put social equity provisions in place that are meaningful and that still allow everybody to be successful in this industry? And there's plenty of room for both. And this is, I think, the most exciting thing about the cannabis industry for me, is that we're really starting at the ground floor. I mean, it's not so much ground floor now, but it's still only like level 1 or 2. We're not at the 50th floor yet. And so we have the ability to help shape this industry in a way that is beneficial and also starts to correct some of the errors of our way. And that's wonderful. That's an amazing thing to be able to do, because what other industry do we think is going to pop up that's going to be like that in our lifetimes? And it's probably not going to happen. And
No.
so that I think it's such a rare opportunity that we can create something new like this and really work out the nuances and try to figure it out in a way that's really productive. And it's such a unique opportunity that I couldn't pass up working in it.
You're a smart man.
Thanks.
So, hey, listen, we are going to get into, where you see the industry is now, where it's going, because I think you have a very unique perspective, being that you see both from a business side and from a government policy legislative side. Before we do that, though, I want to get very concrete just for a second about, the things that you do. Can you give us a specific example of, and you don't have to name names of companies if you can't, but you did X with this intent and had this outcome, just so the audience really understands very clearly and concretely how they could engage, why they should engage, somebody like you, and then what results they can expect.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I'm happy to mention a company by name. It's Trace. Pardon me. They're a seed to sale tracking company based out of Vermont. It's one of the companies that really led me to get into this business nationally. I started representing them in the state of Vermont, and really kind of came up with this idea on a parallel track as they were growing. And what we help them do, and what I still do for them, is manage their government affairs operations. So basically, I function in a role that some of the larger companies would just hire internally for. But some of these small startups or medium-sized companies don't necessarily have the resources to hire someone to do that work internally. And what government affairs management looks like is really doing A to Z of what that operation needs to be successful in a regulatory world. And so that's developing a strategy to go by state, and to which states do we target where there are opportunities, in Trace's instance on seed to sale tracking platforms, where are there going to be RFPs, whether it be medical, recreation, or hemp, because they have a hemp solution. Doing the search and interview and process of hiring of lobbyists in state. I think that's a distinction people really need to understand, is that if you're hiring someone to go lobby it for you in 15 states or 30 states or 50 states, I got to be really frank with you, it's not going to work. There might be an instance one time where that's going to work, but lobbying is a relationship industry. And the way that you have success and the way that you really tell your story is by developing those relationships. And despite, us as an example, and I feel like we have a really good relationship really quickly, that just doesn't happen with legislators, right? Like I can't fly to Texas tomorrow and sit down and have a conversation with the General Assembly and them say, oh yeah, no, that's great. Todd just convinced me I should do this. When 20 people behind me are going to come in afterwards that, know that legislator, had dinner with them, a drink with them the other night. And that's it, for better or worse, that's how this industry works. And so what I do for folks is manage that piece of it. So yes, it becomes more expensive. That is an expense you need to think about as a business. If you're going to lobby, if your strategy is to try to work in 10 states and it's interacting with 10 different legislatures, you probably need 10 different lobbyists. Depending on where you are in your strategic positioning in that state, you might not need them right away or all that time, but you will. And so I manage then all of those people. So let's say you're working in 10 states. I'll manage all of those lobbyists for you. Make sure that the strategy is being implemented correctly, that the lobbyist is doing their job. If they're not doing their job, it becomes my headache. I keep that off the plate of the key players in the company so that they can focus on what they're really good at, which is developing a cannabis brand or business to be successful in the marketplace. With the key goal primarily in my role to win state contracts, to provide services like we did with Trace in Vermont. They provide the seed to sale tracking solution for the hemp program in the state of Vermont. They were the first company to win a seed to sale tracking contract with any state in the country. And it positions them really well for the rec contract when that is up probably in 6 months to a year. And that's really what I can, from a government affairs perspective, can help people with. On the public relations side of things, it's similar and doesn't really require as much in-state support, right? Like It's a little easier to call a reporter at the local paper and have a conversation with them. They're much more used to having outsiders call and interact with them on a news story. And that will help promote their industry, their business. Perfect example of what's going on right now in Washington. You probably saw that they're doing jabs for joints. So if you get your COVID vaccine, right, you get a joint.
Yeah.
Okay. So, that's the Washington style solution to the Ohio lottery for getting your vaccine. It's brilliant. It's great. It's going to appeal to a whole different subset of people that might be vaccine hesitant. And so, if you're a business in the state of Washington, how are you communicating about jabs for joints? What is the story that you're telling about jabs for joints? Are you participating in that program? Are you not participating in that program? And you need a public relations campaign, or at least an effort to really let people know what you're doing, because it's not only going to help people get the vaccine, which is obviously the highest priority right now, but it's also going to get people to be more aware of your business. They might have never even heard of you, but now all of a sudden you have this opportunity to kind of accelerate that name recognition. And that's a public relations campaign that we can help with in a creative way, that we can stay on top of what's happening in the industry, so that we can tell a story that also communicates to the broader public about who you are as a business.
Got it. Thank you. That's helpful. So let's shift a little. There's a lot going on. And I want to talk, the basic crux of where I want to go is what's coming in the industry. What do you see? There's a lot of leading indicators, and I'll raise a few. Like, we work with a lot of CBD brands, and we're seeing more and more either brands coming together or disappearing. So there's shakeup happening. And then there's, still the whole uncertainty about legalization and what the Biden administration is going to do about legalization. And there's, rumors in the next 12 to 24 months, they'll take it off of Schedule 1. So, and I could go on and on and on and on.
Yeah.
But I'm really curious what you see either happening right now that's going to have huge impacts in the future, and or what you see coming overall.
Yeah, it's the crystal ball in politics is always a fun one, because you're going to be wrong more than you're going to be right. In my experience, I have found you just make really bold predictions, because people will remember bold predictions. And when you're right, they remember. So all the wrong stuff, it just doesn't even matter. Just put it aside. Be wrong with this crystal ball. And so, with that in mind, like, more realistically, look, to me, federally, we're just at a standstill. I mean, look at what's happening in Washington, D.C. There is no reason to believe that this Congress is going to get their act together in a way that is going to allow for federal legalization. And I'll put it aside for now. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. We can revisit that. But there are some issues like the MORE Act, Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment Expungement Act, that could happen. Safe banking could happen. Secure and fair banking. Those are possible things that could move forward in federal legislation, I think, in the next 2 years, maybe. The challenge really is are Democrats, the president, going to make these things a priority in his first 2 years in office, when there are legitimately, I think we have to accept that with COVID, there are much bigger issues that this country is facing. And for them to spend political capital on these particular issues when what we're doing now with this state-by-state patchwork is working-ish. It's not great, but bigger states are coming on board. We're creating an almost national market as it is. Yes, there's no interstate trade. That's a problem. It certainly harms the industry, or it stunts its growth. But if you take a step back from just the politics and spending political capital, it's very hard for me to see, especially for something that President Biden is not passionate about. We know he's evolved some, and people can, that's a charged word in politics. Is it flip-flopping? Is it evolving? Is it whatever? his position has changed slightly. He was not great on cannabis legalization. He has never been great on cannabis legalization. So I don't think that he's going to spend the political capital to try to push that through. And I don't see the Democrats in the Senate, especially, being able to get that done, given the dynamics there. It's not that they don't believe in it. I believe Senator Schumer is serious and passionate about passing federal legalization. He's talking about it. That's a win to a certain degree. It's not the win we want, but the fact that it's becoming more commonplace, I think, says to us that it's going to happen here, 5 years or 6 years. And I think that's okay. I think as long as keep momentum going, right? And by that, I mean something in the federal government passes, and it could be the MORE Act, it could be safe banking, which seems probably more likely. They're more well-financed. They have the money to go and lobby. The banks want to be in this industry now. They see the value in it, especially states like New York and New Jersey coming on board. Okay, there's money to be made. And when there's money to be made, Congress acts. So I think that's probably the most likely outcome at this point, is that we see something like that go, but I don't think we're going to see federal legalization. And I think depending on, back to my point where that might not be bad, depending on where you are in this industry, if you're a craft cultivator, a small business, a medium-sized business, federal legalization might hurt you more than it helps you. If we go too quickly from this state by state with small states like Vermont just coming on board, what's going to happen in regard to consolidation and just so much pressure in the way that the rest of our economy works with the Walmarts and the Amazons, where there's not, it's really the top, and then it's, there's a little bit down here, but it's not this trickle down effect that we are seeing in the cannabis industry to a certain degree, and that I think a lot of people want to maintain for a little bit of time, so some of these smaller to medium-sized businesses can become more mature. Certainly the larger companies aren't going to see it as a positive. We saw Amazon recently weigh in about cannabis legalization. They're ready to go for it. Amazon's going to be in this industry eventually. That's going to happen. I mean, it's just a fact. And so what is the path to the best place for their entry for everybody else that's a player in it currently or wants to be a player in it in states like New Jersey or New York that are just becoming legal? And so, yeah, I can see both sides of it, but I think the federal legalization taking a little bit more time overall probably isn't a bad thing for the industry as a whole.
So a little patience as an industry, you're saying, might be a benefit to us.
I think so. I mean, I think so. I think if New York, New Jersey, Virginia, Delaware is making noises. Connecticut House just said today that they think they can pass the Senate version by Wednesday of next week, I think it was. So the governor, Ned Lamont, would have it.
Because they voted that down at first, didn't they?
Yeah, but it's moving now. And so, if you look at it, it's like from Maine all the way down to where my home state, and I'm in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, which isn't going to do anything because we have divided government and it's become a contentious issue. But the only thing that would be left unchecked would be New Hampshire. If Connecticut gets done, maybe Rhode Island as well. So, and then down, we're going to have Virginia. Maryland's not going to be too far behind, Delaware. So the East Coast, West Coast, we know where that is. I mean, that's booming from Nevada, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, California, obviously. And then Mexico to our south, it's going to put huge pressure on the southern states to act. And we've already seen that to a certain degree with Texas finally moved a little bit on their medical program, which was incredibly limited, so limited that it was barely worth mentioning, but that's starting to open up a little bit. Alabama passed medical. Mississippi passed a constitutional amendment. Yes, the Supreme Court threw that out, but they are currently working on passing legislation that will deal with it and get it done this year. Louisiana medical, like if we were talking about this 2 years ago, and I said Mississippi was going to be legal for medical use marijuana by 2021, you would have laughed, and your audience would have laughed and be like, "Who is this kook he's talking?"
Yeah, I wouldn't have believed you. No way.
And as much as I like bold predictions, I wouldn't even have predicted that one. I would have just sounded foolish. But but that's where we're heading. And so there, to me, there's a certain element of these things are playing out actually too slowly, but well. And maybe this helps an immature industry where we have all of these other issues that really matter, like the social equity and justice and reform around those particular issues. Maybe some of this slower movement, this incremental growth, is not a bad thing for the industry as a whole, and not a bad thing for solving some of these bigger challenges.
So debate me on this if you could, or unless you agree. And that is, the way we're looking at it at Three Wells is it's going to kind of go on this slow growth, and then all of a sudden it's just going to skyrocket. And I think that there's going to be a seminal moment. You brought it up just a second ago, and that's banking. Because let's just call it like it is. Look, the plant is phenomenal. It has so many medical benefits and emotional benefits and all those sorts of things that we all know about, and it's natural, and we could go on and on. But money moves everything. And you hit it a minute ago. And is it fair for us to have the perspective that as soon as the banks really are allowed and get behind this, it's going to be a massive change in a very, very short period of time?
Yeah. So my job is to debate the issue that people pay me to debate. So even if I agreed with you, I could debate you.
You just can't resist, right?
No, exactly. Like,
hey, cannabis is green. No, it's not. Let's debate that.
This is what I do.
Fire away, buddy. I love it.
No, but actually, I think on this one, I agree with you completely. I think that's exactly where it's going. I think we're going to see this incremental growth. We're going to see this trajectory where it's going to continue to increase. I mean, Maine and Illinois released their revenue numbers recently. They're skyrocketing, right? So, like, Illinois, big state, Maine, small state. I think Maine was like 5 million. Illinois is like 115 million. But it just keeps going up. And I think we can attribute that to the stigma being decreased, word of mouth. Oh no, I use edibles and they're awesome, whether it be CBD or marijuana. And I think CBD is playing a huge role because people are entering into the market with CBD because they're comfortable, because it's just hemp. It's not marijuana. It's not going to get me high. And then they get introduced to it. And so they start to do more research around cannabis and the plant and really start to understand all of the positive elements that it contains, and that it's not nearly as unsafe as they've been led to believe. So, I think we're going to see something similar. Like, like I mentioned earlier, my firm did civil unions, marriage equality. There was just a poll out recently where on marriage equality now, something like 85% of Democrats supported, and like overall it's like 63, even 55% of Republicans support marriage equality at this point, right? And so you go back to 2000, nobody wishes this took 21 years, but you go back to 2000 when civil unions first passed, those numbers probably would have been like, for Republicans, it would have been like 5%. And for the overall population, maybe we would have been at 50-50. And we're going to see that same growth from folks and how they accept cannabis over time. And I guarantee in 5 years, the numbers will be 10% higher. In 10 years, they'll be 15 or 20% higher. And that will match and mirror the growth in the industry as people get more comfortable with it and they don't feel like they need to hide from it. They're going to want to use it. They're going to want to seek it out. And I think that your point is exactly right, that when the financial institutions kind of open the floodgates to being able to invest, provide loans, have banking be done in a sane, rational way versus what's being done now, you're going to see an explosion in this industry.
So what do you think? We talked about, that medium to larger size business is probably the one that engages you the most. I got that right, yeah?
Yeah.
So, with everything you just said and things that you haven't said, but how do you think they prepare, those companies, and how do, at what point do they engage you? And because this isn't a pitch just for you. You're a phenomenal guy. You do phenomenal work. So there's absolutely, there's your pitch. But my question is that pitch question. It's more about, really trying to look out for these businesses that they see what's coming. They don't know, because I think you're a critical piece of making that business successful going into the future, and in that their voice is heard, they're represented, they're getting their agendas looked at and considered and hopefully enacted and those sorts of things. But I can tell you, I deal with a lot of those companies and their leadership, and as smart as they are and as seasoned as they are, they wouldn't know how or when or why they should engage, Todd Bailey and Leonine. So help them out. What do they do? What should they look for? When should they do it?
Yeah, it feels like a simple question that should have a simple answer. And it's really so complex because we go back to there's no federal legalization. So everybody's working with a different patchwork of regulatory structure and their different place on the continuum of where we are in legalization and implementing that system. And so it really depends a lot on the growth of the company, which state they're in, and which services they would require or would be best suited for. I'll get to that in a second, but I will say the thing I'm actually pitching two separate companies right now to tell them exactly that in a very specific way. Is we come in and we do an evaluation of your company and how it relates to a public relations and government affairs campaign based on your company's growth goals. So if you're trying to get into 10 markets or 15 markets or from Canada to the US, let's say, what does the regulatory patchwork look like? What does the legalization patchwork look like? What is your current status of your company from a financial perspective as well as goals perspective? And what government affairs program should you put in place to strategically achieve those goals so that you are perfectly aligned with the regulatory system in Nevada and the one that's coming in New York and the one that exists for years in Washington. And then we tell them, like, this is what we see for where you are and what you need. And we could either do it this way. We suggest that you hire someone internally because you're at that point in your growth that you are an experienced enough company that you really just need to have someone here all the time managing this. Or you can do it as a part-time person or a part-time person and a consultant, or you can hire us because you just need a consultant to kind of manage it here in the first few steps, and then we can start to pass it along to someone internally. And we hand over that lay of the land and that recommendation for them on what they should be doing for their government affairs program and public relations program. And then we engage with them or we walk away and they implement the plan that we give them. And it's something that I think, we've done in our history, my firm, we've done this for a lot of different industries, not just cannabis, where what ends up happening is exactly what you just said, is that people have never engaged in government affairs. They don't really know. And so we try to have them know for an inexpensive way of getting to know versus trying to engage on your own, learning the hard way, which becomes a very expensive proposition, right? So it is a little bit of convincing people that this is not something that you want to learn on the fly. Invest this money up front, and it's going to help you a ton in the long run. And then, from a government affairs side of things, look, if you're at a place in Vermont, I keep going back to Vermont. Obviously, I was there. I lived there for 25 years. I know the government there very well. But they have their cannabis control board just set up. This is the time to invest in that right now. Like, if you're not hiring a public relations person or a lobbyist to lobby that cannabis control board to get what you need to be successful, you're missing out. You can't do it in a year. It won't work. The regulations will be set. It'll become more expensive to fix anything that you feel like they got wrong or that hinders your business. You need to engage now. And for Jersey, that was probably a year ago. And for New York, a year ago. Same with Connecticut, because they're all kind of sort of in the same place. For states like Virginia, who say, we're going to take, multiple years to set this up, now is the time to engage. You need to be ready, and you can't just be relying on the companies that have the resources to lobby. You need to figure out a way to get in there, whether it's through a trade association or some of the advocacy groups that do wonderful work, but engage with them, contribute to them so that they are listening to you and hearing you and helping you on what your needs are. But if you're just not engaging at all in some way, you're really missing out. And I think you're going to get behind the eight ball and not be successful.
I think that you hit on one of the things that I've seen happen too often. That's procrastination. Oh, things are just happening now. They haven't figured it out. I don't want to spend the time and money to help them figure it out. When in all actuality, to your point, that's the perfect time, because that's when it's malleable. That's when it can be shaped. We all know once some document is signed or once it's on a piece of paper in the government, it might as well be on a tablet. It is set in stone and hard to move.
Yeah, I mean, it's all the years of lobbying, the most dreaded term to hear is, "Oh, we'll fix that next year."
Yeah,
Like,
there's
okay,
20 years from now.
with all due respect, Senator, that worked on me year one, but like, we're not coming back to fix this, and it. We're not going to dig back into this issue. And for a cannabis control board that is a 3-member board in Vermont, just as an example, they're not going to want to revisit this. This is going to be very difficult work. It's a lot of work. And to have something be implemented in year one and then say a year later, well, that's not working. Well, that's not really generally how bureaucrats like to operate. They're risk averse, and they like to see things kind of play out for a little bit of time before they decide, oh, that's not working, let's change again. It doesn't move that way.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. Coming on, we arranged to have this chat and I've thoroughly enjoyed it as always. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you're thinking, man, this really needs to be put on the radar of whomever's listening?
Yeah, I think the thing that people really need to watch, and what doesn't get nearly enough attention is hemp and what's going on with hemp.
How so?
Well, because I think that the hemp industry is going to radically change in the coming years. I think as states so I've done a lot of work in Texas, and I see what's happening in Texas. And from an industrial hemp side of things, we're just getting started. Like, everybody knows CBD, right? I mean, this has been really great for the industry. It's been really important for the industry because I think it has actually helped some of the rec and medical advocacy go forward, because people got more comfortable. But I think we shouldn't sleep on how important it is to have a successful hemp industry, because it's part of this evolution of the cannabis plant and how well it's accepted socially. Because for a long time, if you remember, I remember going back to when I first moved to Vermont, the police would go and rip out wild hemp and then pile it on the table and be like, we got rid of this marijuana, right? And it was like this big thing, like all this marijuana plants. And it was like hemp growing down by the Winooski River. And, we're miles away from that, but we're not miles away from people having their hemp flower taken by the police because they don't know the difference between hemp flower and marijuana flower. And so what I see happening in Texas is it's not going to be a big CBD state. It's going to be a big industrial hemp state. And it's going to be used in very common practices, whether it's hempcrete or plastics or other building materials or animal feed or whatever it is. Having people recognize that the plant can be used for those common day uses as well, I think will help change the perspective significantly. And so it's not as big a deal around, consumption of cannabis, but it plays such an important role, I think, as the overall national perspective and national view of cannabis as a whole. And, USDA has the rules. Most of the states have put rules in place. This is the first year ever that the SAS grant for USDA is going to include hemp.
What is that?
They give out, I think it's like $150 million, $10 million to each recipient in the ag sector. And the cohorts of whoever they apply, it helps understand the economic value of an agricultural crop on like the rural economy, how the uses of it are applicable. This is the first year ever that the USDA is going to give one of those $10 million blocks to hemp. So it's becoming more mainstream. I'm hopeful that Trace, my client Trace, is an applicant with some of the cohorts with the University of Vermont, University of Kentucky, NC. I'm gonna remember the name. Colorado State, and it's a North Carolina like engineering and agricultural school, but I can't. A&T, North Carolina A&T. So those 4 schools are all combined together on this grant application. Hopefully they get it. But it'll be the first time that hemp is included in that. And so it's really, all of these things, all this incremental growth, whether it be directly with rec or medical or in hemp, matter for the whole industry. And I just hope that people don't move on from hemp because of everything that's happening with cannabis, because it's really has been critical in getting us where we are.
So, Todd, let me distill this down, make sure I got it right. When you say hemp is going to be one of the greatest factors in the overall cannabis, so marijuana, hemp, the full family, what you're saying is there are 2 facets to that are going to have a big impact simultaneously. One is on the consumer side, being CBD and possibly delta 8 THC, which is, for everyone, that's just a weaker form of THC that is actually in the hemp plant, but it's very, very low in concentration. So that's part one on the consumer side, which it sounds like you're saying that will help change perceptions, that will help change laws on the consumer side, make it more accepted and available. That's part one. Part two being industrial, where it's used in rope, fabrics, you said plastics, all these other things. So, and because it's such a hardy plant, easy to grow, and versatile, it could have a massive influence on all kinds of manufacturing sectors across the country. Are those the 2 buckets that you're talking about? Did I do okay with that?
Yeah. No, that's it. You nailed it. 100%. Okay. Yep. And I think people often underestimate what the cultural impact is when these things happen. When it becomes mainstream, it becomes just second nature for folks. Right. And I think most people don't differentiate between any of the cannabis plants, right? So if they just hear hemp, they're like, oh my gosh, hemp does that. And it's going to be like just normal now, right? So I think it helps with the normalcy and just mainstreaming everything, which is, it was helpful for everyone.
All right, man. Well, look, this has been a great chat, but you're not getting off the hook yet. I got 3 very random questions for you. Kind of put you on the spot. And we'll make it easy. Favorite thing to do when you're not changing the world at your job every day?
Well, so my favorite thing to do is probably mountain biking. That's my favorite outside activity. It's such a great release. It's so much fun. Zipping through trees, nearly smashing your head on a tree at 20 miles an hour. That's by far probably my favorite activity outside of work.
What bike do you ride?
Oh, right now I have a Trek Fuel EX, but I am about to acquire an Ibis Ripmo. It's been ordered, and when I go up to Vermont in a couple weeks for a week, it's supposed to be there waiting for me. So fingers crossed. The one of the big downsides with COVID has been the choking of the supply chain, and so this bike's been very difficult to come across.
It will be a well-fought battle won.
Yeah.
Hey, okay. So, what is a public affairs, government affairs guru like yourself watch? Are you Netflixing something or Huluing, or what's on your watch list right now?
Yeah, I bounce around, and I have to admit to having a habit of rewatching things that I enjoyed as much as watching new things. So, COVID has definitely given me the opportunity to rewatch The Wire, but so I grew up just outside of Philadelphia. So this is home. Even though I lived in Vermont for 25 years, this is home. So I am by far one of the most long-suffering Philadelphia sports fans ever. So right now my time is if I watch something, it's probably the Philadelphia 76ers and the playoff run with Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons. It's been a ton of fun to watch.
We won't even talk about that, man. That'll end in a big debate for sure. All right. So if you could leave everyone on this listening to this right now with one sage word of advice or point or something that you would impart to them, what would that be?
So it's funny because, I probably wouldn't have said this, but for some things that happened today. In my industry, people, and everywhere right now in the world, people are really caught up in reading into things and drawing conclusions that aren't based in fact. And we've become a society where we don't really want to defer to experts anymore. And that goes for everybody. There's so much information out there. We think we've acquired it, and we think we kind of know what's going on. And in my industry in particular, especially when you're lobbying, it's always a conspiracy, right? Government is always a conspiracy, right? There's always a plan. Like, this bill failed because of this, or they're doing this because it's this, or this entity wants something, and so they got them to not do it. And the reality is, we have a saying, it's incompetence over conspiracy every time. And it doesn't necessarily have to be incompetence. It could just be an honest mistake. It could be someone not understanding the dynamics around who all the players were or whatever. But when you look at something that's happening, think it's incompetence over conspiracy, or whatever word you want to put in place of incompetence. And it's really
it doesn't instill confidence when you have
but it's not people out to get you, right? Like, everybody in these systems are human, and really they just make mistakes. And there's so many moving parts. There are very few people that I've ever come across and worked with that are smart enough, competent enough, and devious enough to have a conspiracy planned out, implemented, and succeed. It's almost always by accident and hard work. That's how we get there. And I think that, I think we'd all be better served if we just look at it like, this was just an honest mistake, or this came about honestly. And now how do I go about working honestly to change it in the way that I want it? Because we can actually do that if we work collectively, if we communicate properly and effectively, and tell people, what we think is going on, and can show them the evidence of why this will work. I guarantee you we can make the changes that we want if we have the political will to stick it out, versus taking the easy way out and saying, oh no, that was just so-and-so wanted it, so they got it. And it's just not really how it works.
Mind if I layer onto that for a second?
Please.
So one of the things that, everybody listening, and I try to do this myself, and it's hard, is allow people the room to change their minds legitimately.
Yep.
Right. Especially in our industry when you're dealing with the government, because for decades now, the government has had to follow the laws and has had to fight and rail against cannabis because it was a law against the product. And so we have to give, all the legislators, the government officials, leadership, the opportunity to get educated and change their mind and not call them flip-floppers. Now, I'm not taking anything away from those that, and I'm not going to get into political affiliations or names. We know who they are. They're in the news, who do these dramatic and just incredibly naive flip-flops. That's not the case in our industry. And I think if everybody just gives permission to our legislators and our government officials and leaders to educate and change their minds, I think we'll be in a good place. I hope you are okay with me adding to that to your what you dropped.
100%, because it's 100% accurate. And I think having that honest dialogue and approaching this with an open mind is how we can actually achieve the change that we would like to see happen, whether it be from a specific industry policy that is helping or harming business to the provisions around social equity. They need to hear from everybody. They need to understand it. And a lot of people are starting in a place where they don't understand. And I think the way that you articulate, and this is something I learned very early on, and it's probably a less divisive and more diplomatic words of wisdom at the end, is start where they are. That's a lobbying mantra. Start where they are. And the way that you start where they are is by asking them questions and probing and really better understanding who they are as a person, what their views are, And then you can learn from that on how much education you need to do and what your proper communication level should be. Because if you just launch into, I know everything about the cannabis industry, you're going to lose people right away because they don't know what you're talking about. You got to start at 101 before you get to 400.
Good advice. Yeah, I think we tend to jump ahead too much, thinking everybody knows this stuff.
Yep.
So Todd Bailey, president of Leonine Ventures, how do people get a hold of you if they want to track you down with all this wisdom you're holding in your head?
Yeah, so our website is leoninepublicaffairs.com. You can find all my contact information there. But my email is Todd at Leonine Public Affairs, or go to LinkedIn, Todd K. Bailey.
All right, and we'll put those on screen. Actually, but they probably would have shown on screen in post-production by now. So they were on screen. Not you, I'll pretend. And of course, we'll put it in the links below. But listen, Todd, it's been fantastic, and personally, I thank you, and on behalf of Three Wells, be well, live well, do well. I thank you for your time and your expertise, and I hope you'll come back and we'll do another one of these, and we'll expand on, I think, Mexico and maybe some other things that'll be happening by then. But thank you very much. It's been fantastic.
No, I really appreciate it. Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, take care.